Hey friends, my new book, Negotiation Made Simple, comes out October 31st. If you pre-order the book, I want you to have 4 special bonuses. The first is the negotiation preparation checklist. The second is access to an interview with Ryan Hawk, the host of the Learning Leader podcast. Third is a group coaching experience where I will be taking questions and helping people deal with their actual negotiations. And fourth is a live webinar where I will teach people how to use the negotiation preparation tool. All of these things are worth like 10 times the cost of the book. Don't miss this deal. All you have to do is to go purchase the book wherever you buy books, and then go to lowrygroup.net/book. And there you can give us information about your order, and we will get these bonuses to you. Be sure to go out and pre-order Negotiation Made Simple. Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win your next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. We're talking about empathy. This is part 2. If you didn't listen to part 1, go back and listen to it. This is going to be part 2, to where we get really practical. And what I will give you on this episode is 4 practical suggestions on how it is that you can be more empathetic as a negotiator. Now, you will want to pay attention to these because these 4 suggestions, these can give you tremendous power. These can give you the opportunity to put deals together that no one else can get done. Because by using these 4 things, you can understand and learn more about what is driving the other side to say yes. We're also going to answer a really outstanding question from the audience about how to deal with coworkers that you don't like, and how you can negotiate effectively with them. So be sure to listen to the end. Let's jump into this conversation about empathy in negotiation. So we're talking about empathy in business. And as we think about empathy in business and this really new conversation that's happening across the world in terms of how business leaders can be more effective by being more empathetic, many people often ask, how do you do it? It's one thing to just put yourself in someone else's shoes, and that's kind of the big definition of empathy. But it's another thing to really get practical in terms of how you do this as a leader and as a negotiator. And so what I want to do today is I want to give you 4 very practical skills about how it is that you can be more empathetic and use that empathy to drive better negotiation outcomes. The first thing is, you have to create the environment for empathy. I believe environment is really, really important. I spent some time building out innovation centers, and the reality is it's just true. If you get yourself in a room that invites innovation, it's amazing how people are stimulated to come up with new ideas and new things. So for example, like the color green. The color green is a positive color, but it's a color that invites energy. It's a color that invites people to come together and to share ideas. I had no idea when we painted this room bright green, the positive response that it would elicit from people that came into it. People loved it because of the color, but it was almost at a subconscious level, like they didn't even know that it was happening. But they would come into this room and they would begin to just go to work, and ideas would flow and collaboration would happen. And part of it had to do with the color. There's some science that backs that up. Now, I'm not suggesting here that you go and repaint all of your offices or repaint every room in what you negotiate. That's probably not practical. But what is practical is how we set up the room. So for example, imagine walking into a conference room where you're going to have a negotiation or you're going to have a meeting that involves a negotiation. Many times if we walk into a conference room, there's going to be a big static table. And what's going to happen is people naturally are going to sit on opposite sides of that table. and begin the conversation. Now, think about what has just occurred there, to where now all of a sudden, here we have two parties and they're sitting on opposite sides of the table, and there's this massive, perhaps beautiful, but still it's an obstruction, and it keeps us away from each other, and it actually pits us against each other. It's an adversarial posture to be across the table. And so if you can, perhaps try to set up the room differently or do it in a different room. And so you see a lot of offices now going to lounge furniture in conference rooms. Well, there's a reason for that. There's psychology around that in terms of people coming in and getting comfortable and being willing to get together and to sit differently and engage differently. The reality is that has an impact on the interaction. And so one of the things that you can do as a highly sophisticated negotiator is to control the environment. And if you want to create more collaboration or you want to foster more empathy, think about setting it up like a counselor's office, not like a boardroom, to where you can quickly engage. You can invite people to be more comfortable and to share more. It will entice more conversation to happen. And as a result of that, empathy can flow. So a really easy thing you can do is simply make a good decision about the room or set up the room right. That can foster more empathy. The next thing we can do in terms of thinking about empathy is be much more intentional about how we listen. Listening is a skill that not many people pay close attention to, but it is an absolutely critical skill to the communication process. And when we are thinking about being empathetic, when we're trying to be influential by connecting with people, listening becomes critically important. I often joke with the groups that I work with. I'll be with them for like a day and a half, and we'll go through a negotiation training. And we'll get to this moment where we talk about listening. And I'll joke with them and tell them that they're not very good listeners. Some of them are a little offended. Some of them, they don't know if I'm joking or not. But I'll tell them, I'll just be like, you guys are horrible at listening. And then I'll tell them why they're bad at listening. And the reason why they're bad at listening is because I can only talk at about 150 to 200 words per minute. But you can process information at about 600, 700, maybe even 800 words per minute, which means that you have excess capacity. And so as a result of that, you can be listening to everything I'm saying, and yet your mind can be doing other things. Some of you are probably doing that right now. You may be out on a jog right now listening to this podcast. And while you're listening to this and you're taking this in and you're remembering these ideas and processing this information, you're also out there running. And so you're watching for traffic. You're checking your time. You're making sure that every step is a safe one. Your mind is doing a lot of different things because it has the capacity to do so. And yet, what happens though, is that when we're in more of a one-on-one communication or we're in a meeting, and all of a sudden our mind begins to wander, we're still dialed in. We still know what's going on. We're still tracking the conversation. And yet when our mind wanders to other things, like what are we going to say next? Or maybe I got to pull this information. Or you may just be distracted. You may be worried about something that's going on at home. Or maybe your child has a big event that day that you're thinking about. What happens is, as our mind drifts, so does our body language. And as our body language drifts, here's what happens that's really important to remember. The communication scholars say you cannot not communicate, which means that even when we're not trying to send a message, sometimes we do. And this is what I find often happens when we don't listen well, is that as we start to pay attention and our body language drifts and our eyes go different places and we no longer appear engaged to the other side, what happens is we send a message that we don't care. And this is the opposite of empathy, right? Empathy is all about caring. It's all about connecting. We want to build that because out of that grows trust. But if we don't pay attention to how we listen, we can actually delete and defeat what we're trying to accomplish. The progress that we made will be gone, and the empathy that we're trying to establish won't be there, all in how we listen. And so listening well, it's very practical, but it's also something that we have to be active and intentional in doing. We've got to pay attention to it because we've got to make sure that we're sending the right messages to the other side. The next thing, the third thing, in terms of how it is that we can establish empathy, this one's actually really fun. And it's simply finding common ground. And so as people tell their story, as people talk about themselves, finding points of connection in that story and in what they share, not only is it fun, but it also builds connectivity. There's a lot of research that says that if you have something in common with someone, likability immediately goes up. And so if you went to the same college, or you have kids at the same school, or you have the same favorite NFL team, whatever the case might be, there will be a benefit to finding common ground. And so this past weekend, I took my son on a recruiting trip, and he went to this college talking about playing golf for this particular college. And sure enough, the golf coach, his daughter is headed to a university that I used to be affiliated with. And so that point of connectivity was wonderful in terms of being able to connect with that coach, being able to get to know him, being able to build some rapport. It all happened through that little connection that we didn't see coming. And so that's kind of how the world works. And it was interesting talking to my 17-year-old son, who was kind of amazed by the connection, and telling him those things are very influential. In everyone that you come across and you work with, you want to find common ground because it enhances likability. And so that conversation prior to getting started, sharing some things about you that will allow people to connect, those things are really, really important in terms of being able to set the stage for good empathy to happen. What happens is those things, those points of connectivity build trust. And as you build trust, people are willing to share more, which will allow you to better understand what's driving them. And that's the key to being a successful negotiator, is to understand what's driving the other side and then being able to respond to it. This last thing is a really interesting idea. I've never heard this idea in the context of negotiation before. It's really an idea that comes out of leadership. And it's an idea that I first heard communicated by Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft. When Satya came in and became the CEO of Microsoft, he did so wanting to build a different culture. There was a little bit of a cutthroat culture at Microsoft. It was pretty intense. And as a result of that, he didn't think Microsoft was performing the way that it needed to. And so, because of some things in his personal life, because of some challenges with his son, because of watching his wife in terms of caring for their son, he understood empathy in a way that other leaders perhaps didn't. And so when he walked in, he decided he was going to transform the company through empathy. And so instead of walking in and being a know-it-all, he decided to walk in and be a learn-it-all CEO. This idea of learn-it-all is really powerful. This is something that I think can transform our opportunities and the power that we have at the negotiating table. And so learn-it-all means that instead of just communicating our position, instead of just trying to persuade the other side that we're right, learn-it-all says, let's begin by asking questions. Let's be sure that we understand what's really driving the other side. Let's make sure that as we think about the alternatives that are available to us, we've done our homework and we know what those alternatives are. Let's make sure that we understand the facts around the particular negotiation and have a good understanding there. But critically, and this is where oftentimes people don't go this far, let's make sure we understand what's driving the other side. Let's make sure we understand their triggers and the decision points that will be important factors for them in deciding to do the deal or not do the deal, or deciding to go with the resolution and putting the problem behind them. Those are the things that if we can understand and we can learn, that gives us tremendous power to then be creative in terms of how we respond. So, 4 practical suggestions. This doesn't require any education, doesn't require a lot of skill building. All this does is require us to be intentional about some skills that we already do, but perhaps don't do in the context of negotiation. But taking these skills to the negotiation table to where I think they can help you deliver great outcomes. So number 1, set up the room right. Create the environment where people are comfortable sharing and having conversation. 2, we have to listen well, which for us means we've got to be intentional about the listening part of the process and make sure that we are managing our body language and telling the other side that we care and we want more information. Finding common ground, connecting with the story that is told. That's absolutely critical in terms of being able to build that trust and rapport. And then lastly, taking this whole learn-it-all approach to negotiation to where instead of just trying to convince the other side, we come at it from the perspective of trying to learn what will be the decision-making factors that make a difference. And if we know those and we understand those, then we have an opportunity, unlike others, to where we can creatively respond and make deals that wouldn't otherwise happen or put solutions together that wouldn't otherwise come together. I wish you all the best in your negotiation adventures. Bring a little more empathy to the table and watch what it does in terms of helping you be more successful. One of the things I love doing on this podcast is answering questions from listeners. And we have another question today that I think is a great question, one that many people find themselves in these situations, especially with coworkers. And so this listener writes, "Hey, John, I'm a big fan of the podcast and I've been loving episodes so far. I have a tough conversation coming up with a coworker. We are both directors with dozens of direct reports, and we're being forced to share resources. So we have to share employees' time and budgets on certain projects. But here's the catch. This coworker doesn't like me. And if I'm being honest, I don't like this person either. I love my job and want to keep it, and I want to keep a good rapport with this coworker. How can I do this?" So a great question, right? Here's a moment where we have coworkers, some of whom we love and some of whom, frankly, are really difficult. And as a result of that, though, we've got to continue working with them, and we've got to be productive, and we've got to lead through whatever it is that keeps us from really liking each other. And so in this particular situation, to where you've got a meeting with someone and now all of a sudden you may have to work more closely with somebody that you really don't connect with, or you may not even like, it's important that we separate the people from the problem. And so really good teams are able to do this. Many times you find this in terms of cabinets, to where you have a governor or a president or a CEO that brings together their cabinet. And there are members of that cabinet that do not like each other. But if they can get connected around the mission of what they're trying to do, there is still a lot of great work that can be done, even though they won't be going out for drinks afterwards. And so in this particular situation, what you have to remember is that as we think about this process, it's important to try to take the people components out of it. Okay, this was something that was in the book Getting to Yes that was written years and years ago, this idea of separate the people from the problem. And so separating the people doesn't mean we disregard them. It doesn't mean that we ignore them. What it means is that we keep our eye on the problem. And we understand that there are going to be people dynamics, but because we're so focused on fixing the problem, we're able to put those aside for just a bit in order to take care of the problem. The other thing it means that's really important is to understand that many problems, they kind of come through people. And so it's easy to blame the people and say, well, that person's crazy, or that person's being ridiculous or unreasonable. Whereas I think this idea says, no, there's a problem here. They have their perspective. You may have your perspective. You may not even agree with their perspective, and they may not agree with yours. And yet here's the moment where instead of just dismissing them as unreasonable, but which is not productive, here's the moment where I think if we separate the people from the problem and we keep working the problem, there's an opportunity to be productive despite the differences that may exist. So the other thing is, I heard a CEO one time tell me, he said, one of the things that I do with my people when I get frustrated with them or I don't like them is I will literally have a meeting with them and I'll be really honest with them. I'll say, listen, I don't like you. But then he'll say this, which I think is really, really wise. He'll say, but I don't like not liking you. I want to like you. And so here are some things that I think would help us build our relationship. If you would do this, or if you'd stop doing this, and then he would invite the same thing going the other direction. Tell me what I can do to help our relationship. Tell me what I need to do or what I need to stop doing. And as a result of that, they would begin to work through the things that caused each other not to like each other. Another thing that I found super effective is with people that you don't like, lean into them a little bit. I've done this where I was on a cabinet and there were other people that were part of that cabinet that I didn't really like. And yet I knew I had to develop a working relationship with them, even though these would never be the people that I call to take out to drinks on Friday night. And so what I would do is I would intentionally lean in. So in meetings, I would sit next to them. For exercises, I would work with them, all in an effort to just try to build some positive interaction that would cause likability to go up. And so what research shows is that if you have a negative, bad interaction with someone, which can often happen with people that you don't like, it actually takes about 7 positive interactions to recover and to get things back to baseline after one of those negative, bad interactions. And so if you think about it from an economic standpoint, with the people that we don't like, we need to be investing, we need to be creating those positive interactions. And what's interesting about this is what will happen is likability actually will go up. You'll actually start to like the person more. And if you start liking them, they start liking you, then it's amazing what can happen. Last thing I'll say in response to this question is this, and that is, if you look at why people don't like you, oftentimes it's because they don't think you like them. And it's really interesting, and there's some research that kind of backs this up. But what's fascinating is many times people will not like people that they don't think like them. And so with someone that doesn't like you, one of the best things that you can do is to make sure that you're doing things to tell them that you like them. And it'll be interesting to see if that changes. And so in dealing with kind of the likability issue with this question, there's a couple of ideas. As you think about dealing with the problem, even if you're not able to work through those relationship barriers that stand in your way, keep it professional and keep it productive. There's a lot of great things that have been accomplished in this world by people that really didn't like each other, yet they found a way to come together and perform and do so in ways that are phenomenal. Take, for example, like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. If you've seen the Last Dance documentary, it's amazing how there were all sorts of relational challenges and tension there. And yet, together, they won NBA championship after NBA championship after NBA championship. I don't think they're relatively close to this day. There was nothing from that documentary that suggested that they were. Yet on the basketball court, those two got it done, even though there's a lot to suggest they didn't have the strongest relationship. And so there's still hope for success, even when you find yourself working with people that you don't absolutely love or perhaps don't even like. Thank you so much for that outstanding question. I hope that was helpful. If you've got a question, I'd love to hear it. And we'd love to tackle it on an episode coming up soon. Send that question to book@lowrygroup.net. If you'll send it there to that email address, I'll look at it and we'll jump into some of your questions in future episodes. Thanks for listening to this conversation about empathy and negotiation. This is something that doesn't get associated often, but it's something that I've been very intentional about in terms of thinking about how we can use empathy to generate better negotiation outcomes. I've got a whole chapter on this in my book, Negotiation Made Simple, which comes out October 31st in just a few weeks. If you have not pre-ordered yours, do so now by going to wherever you buy books. If you do that, go to lowrygroup.net/book. And there you will find a form which you can give me your receipt number. And as a result of that, you will get some incredible pre-order bonuses. Pre-order bonuses that will be tools to help you prepare for negotiation, some interviews that I'm going to do, and some content that will make you a more effective and more sophisticated negotiator. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode.